I've never said this out loud before. Not to my friends. Not to my family. Not even in therapy, though I came close once and then changed the subject at the last second. Sometimes, late at night, after my son falls asleep and the house finally goes quiet, I sit on the couch and let myself think something that feels almost forbidden. I wish I had waited before becoming a parent. Even writing that, even admitting it in my own mind, makes my chest tighten with guilt. Because I love my son more than anything in this world. He is kind, curious, funny in ways that catch me off guard. But love and regret can live in the same heart. I learned that the hard way. When I found out I was pregnant, I was 23 years old and still trying to figure out who I was. I lived in a small apartment outside Columbus, sharing rent with a roommate who worked night shifts at a hospital. My days were filled with entry-level marketing tasks that felt important at the time, building slide decks, answering emails, talking about brand strategy like I actually understood what I was doing. Life felt open. Temporary in the best way. Like I was still in the middle of becoming. I was dating Ryan then. Ryan had this quiet confidence that made everything seem possible. He talked about starting his own company, about building something meaningful before turning 30. Being around him made me feel like I was part of a bigger story. We weren't reckless. At least that's what I told myself later. We talked about the future in abstract terms. Someday we'd have kids, someday we'd buy a house, someday we'd slow down. Someday felt very far away. Until one Tuesday afternoon, when I stood in a bathroom stall staring at two pink lines that didn't feel real. I remember sitting on the closed toilet lid, staring at the test in my hand while the fluorescent light buzzed overhead. My first thought wasn't excitement. It was a quiet, heavy sense of finality. Like a door had closed somewhere behind me. When I told Ryan that evening, he went very still. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He just stared at the floor for a long moment. "We'll figure it out," he said eventually. But his voice carried a weight I couldn't ignore. We talked about options, carefully, almost clinically, like we were discussing someone else's life. I scheduled an appointment at a clinic. I even drove there. But when I sat in the parking lot, watching people walk in and out, I felt something shift inside me. Not certainty. Not clarity. Just a quiet resistance I couldn't explain. I drove home without going in. When I told Ryan, he nodded slowly. He said he supported me. But something subtle changed between us after that, like an invisible tension we both pretended not to notice. We moved in together sooner than planned. Everyone said it made sense financially. Looking back, I think we were trying to convince ourselves we were ready. Pregnancy wasn't magical for me. I didn't glow. I didn't feel an overwhelming sense of purpose. I felt anxious. Physically uncomfortable. Constantly aware that my life was shifting in ways I couldn't fully control. Friends would touch my belly and say, "You must be so excited." I'd smile and say yes. Inside, I mostly felt scared. Ryan threw himself into work. Long hours. Late nights. He said he was building our future. I believed him because I wanted to. But many evenings I sat alone on the couch, scrolling through parenting forums, wondering why everyone else seemed so certain while I felt like an imposter. Our son, Ethan, was born during a late summer storm. The sky outside the hospital windows flashed with lightning, and rain tapped steadily against the glass. Labor felt endless, waves of pain and exhaustion blending into something surreal. When they placed him on my chest, he was warm and impossibly small. Everyone watched my face, waiting. I smiled. I cried. I held him close. And underneath all of that, there was a whisper of fear so deep I could barely acknowledge it. My life will never be the same again. The first months blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and constant worry. Ethan cried often, long stretches that left me pacing the apartment at 2 a.m, whispering soft reassurances I wasn't sure I believed myself. Ryan went back to work quickly. He said we needed the income. I didn't argue. But I remember standing by the door one morning, holding Ethan while Ryan grabbed his keys, feeling an unexpected flicker of resentment I immediately pushed down. He got to leave. I stayed. There were days when I felt deeply connected to my son, watching his tiny fingers curl around mine, feeling a surge of fierce protectiveness I had never known before. And there were other days when I felt like I was moving through someone else's life. I didn't talk about those days. Good mothers aren't supposed to admit that. Around 3 months in, exhaustion began to feel like a permanent state. One night, after hours of crying that I couldn't soothe, I placed Ethan gently in his crib and walked into the bathroom. I closed the door and sat on the floor, breathing slowly, trying to calm the rising panic in my chest. Through the wall, I could still hear him crying. I remember thinking, with a kind of quiet desperation, I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. Ryan knocked on the door eventually. Why is he still crying? He asked. I didn't have an answer. That moment stayed with me, not because of anything dramatic, but because it was the first time I felt the gap between what I thought motherhood would feel like and what it actually was. I loved my son. But I also felt lost inside the role. As months passed, small tensions between Ryan and me grew into something harder to ignore. We spoke less. We moved around each other carefully, like roommates sharing space rather than partners building a life. Sometimes I caught myself missing the version of us that existed before responsibility reshaped everything. I hated admitting that, even to myself. When Ethan was about 4 months old, I returned to work. Dropping him off at daycare that first morning, I expected to feel overwhelming sadness. Instead, I felt something more complicated, relief mixed with guilt so sharp it made my stomach ache. Driving away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror even though his seat was empty. What kind of mother feels lighter after leaving her baby? That question haunted me for weeks. Ryan's startup began struggling around the same time. Investors hesitated. Deadlines slipped. Stress settled over him like a shadow. We argued more, usually about small things that felt bigger than they were. Money. Sleep. Who was more tired? Underneath it all was a shared anxiety neither of us knew how to name. One evening, during a quiet dinner, Ryan said softly, "Maybe we rushed into this." The words hung between us. I nodded because part of me had thought the same thing many times. But hearing it out loud made it real. By Ethan's first birthday, the distance between us felt undeniable. Ryan stayed late at work more often. When he was home, he seemed distracted, physically present but emotionally elsewhere. I told myself it was just stress. I wanted to believe that. Then one night, after another argument about finances, he said something that shifted everything. "I don't think I'm cut out for this," he admitted quietly. I remember feeling a cold wave move through me. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "This life," he said. Not long after, he moved out. Suddenly, I was navigating parenthood mostly on my own, learning routines, managing work, handling illnesses, making decisions without someone to share the weight. There were moments of deep pride. And moments when I lay awake wondering who I might have become if life had unfolded differently. I rarely voiced those thoughts. They felt too dangerous. Because admitting them felt like betraying my child. Over time, I built a fragile rhythm: work, daycare, evening routines, bedtime stories. It wasn't easy, but it was stable. Then, almost 2 years later, Ryan reached out saying he wanted to be more involved. He sounded calmer. More grounded. Part of me felt hopeful. Another part felt uneasy, though I couldn't fully explain why. Looking back now, I think my intuition was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. Because what unfolded next would force me to confront not only my feelings about motherhood, but the deeper truth about the relationship I had trusted with my future. And it would change how I understood regret, forever. The first time Ryan tried to re-enter our lives, I didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. He showed up one evening, unannounced, holding a small toy for Ethan. My son, of course, smiled instantly, completely oblivious to the storm swirling around the adults. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Hi," I said softly, more to fill the silence than as a greeting. Ryan sat across from me on the living room couch, eyes flicking nervously to Ethan, then back to me. I want to be part of his life," he said quietly. His voice had lost that confident tone I remembered. It was almost vulnerable. I nodded slowly. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to push him out entirely. "I know you do," I said, swallowing the bitterness rising in my chest. "But you left. You left when it was hardest." He flinched. "I know," he whispered. "And I've regretted that every single day. I just didn't know how to fix things. I thought distance would help, but I see now that it only made it worse." I watched Ethan stack blocks on the floor, oblivious to the tension. His laughter was a sharp contrast to the knot in my stomach. 4 months after, Ryan's presence became intermittent. He would text, then disappear for days. Sometimes he would show up at daycare unannounced, insisting he had every right to see Ethan. Other times, he would apologize for the distance, saying he wanted to do better. I hated the constant uncertainty. Each encounter felt like a test I hadn't studied for. I worried endlessly about how it was affecting Ethan, about what he would think of a father who came and went like the tide. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I found myself crying quietly in the kitchen, holding a mug of cold coffee. Ethan had finally fallen asleep, and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I whispered to myself, almost as if saying it aloud would make it real, "I didn't sign up for this alone. I didn't ask for this chaos. And I can't fail him." I hated that I had felt that way. I hated that the love I had for Ethan could coexist with such fear, such raw doubt. But it did. Every mother I knew said the first months were difficult, but no one prepared me for the crushing weight of isolation, of responsibility, of constant second-guessing. Weeks later, Ryan came over with an apology that felt rehearsed, almost too polished. "I want to be better," he said. "I want to be the father you both deserve." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to that version of Ryan, the one who once promised to be my partner in everything. But I also remembered the late nights, the silence, the way he disappeared when I needed him most. I realized that love alone couldn't erase the fear that had settled deep in my chest. And that fear was only growing when I discovered that he had been collecting information about me, old messages, little confessions I had never meant to share. Things I had said to friends, to myself, in moments of exhaustion and despair. I didn't know if he was doing it to protect himself, or to control me. All I knew was that every word I had whispered in private felt suddenly dangerous, like they could be used against me. I stayed awake that night, listening to the soft breaths of my sleeping son, wondering how I had gone from the uncertain, anxious mother I had been in those first months, to someone who now had to guard every thought, every word, every gesture. It felt impossible. And yet, as I watched Ethan curl up under his blanket, I understood one truth more clearly than anything else: my regret wasn't about him. It was about the timing, about the loss of control, about trusting someone who wasn't ready to be the partner I needed. Ethan had done nothing wrong. He was perfect in ways I could never fully explain. The regret I carried was mine alone, and the only thing I could do was learn how to love him fiercely, despite it. Because even in my darkest moments, I knew one thing for certain: he deserved a mother who never gave up. The tension between us didn't explode immediately. It was slow. Like a storm building on the horizon. Ryan began showing up more often, claiming he wanted to bond with Ethan. Sometimes he was quiet and attentive, and for a moment, I allowed myself to relax. But other times, his presence made me hyper-aware of every little thing I did wrong, every missed chore, every tired glance, every sigh of exhaustion. One evening, he arrived unannounced while I was folding laundry. Ethan ran to him, grinning, and my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. Ryan bent down to pick him up, smiling in a way that reminded me of the man I had once loved. But the eyes were different. Calculating. Watching. judging. "I think he's ready to start sleeping through the night," Ryan said softly, handing me a cup of tea. His voice was calm, too calm. It made my stomach knot. I nodded politely, folding the last of Ethan's tiny socks. "He'll get there," I said. He lingered, leaning against the doorway. "I want to help more," he said. "I want to be a real part of his life." I looked at him. The words sounded good. They sounded honest. And I wanted to believe them. I wanted to trust him again. But the memory of him leaving, of disappearing during the months that had broken me, made the thought impossible. "I'm not sure what that looks like," I admitted quietly. "It's been just me for so long. I don't know how to share him again." Ryan sighed, a soft sound that somehow carried both regret and frustration. "I didn't know how to do it before," he said. "I thought I could fix everything on my own. But I see now. I need to be here. For him. For you." I nodded, unsure whether to trust the words or brace for the other shoe to drop. Days passed. Ryan's visits became structured, predictable, almost rehearsed. I noticed the little things, the way he would subtly point out when Ethan had a new skill, the way he asked me about my day as if he was evaluating me, not just conversing. I started to feel a familiar unease settle back into my chest. He was present. But I couldn't shake the feeling that every interaction was a test, a performance. And deep down, I wondered if he had learned nothing, or if he was learning too well. Then came the first confrontation. It was a Thursday evening. Ethan was asleep. I was sitting on the couch, exhausted after a long day, when Ryan started asking questions about finances, schedules, the daycare's routines. "I just want to make sure everything is running smoothly," he said, calm but insistent. I bristled. "Everything is fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. But inside, anger and fear were rising. "I've handled this all by myself for months. You weren't here. You left." He paused, and for a moment, I saw vulnerability, the same vulnerability he had shown during the first months of Ethan's life. But then his eyes shifted, and the warmth disappeared. "Calculating. Careful. I know I left," he said softly. "But I want to be better now. I can't change the past. I can only be present now." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the words felt rehearsed. Too perfect. Like something he had said to prepare for this exact conversation. That night, after he left, I sat in Ethan's room, listening to his soft breathing, and felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that Ryan was showing up. Dread that I had no idea what he was capable of if he decided to manipulate the situation again. Weeks later, I discovered he had been saving messages I had sent to friends. Private confessions. Late-night texts about exhaustion and fear. Things I had said when I didn't know anyone was listening. I stared at them, shaking. My own words, my own vulnerability, now in his hands. Part of me wanted to confront him. Part of me wanted to disappear. When I finally did confront him, I felt a rush of anger I hadn't realized I was holding. "Why are you keeping these?" I asked, voice trembling. Ryan's face was unreadable. "I wanted to understand," he said quietly. "I wanted to know how you were feeling. To see if I could help." I looked at him, my chest tightening. "Or to use them against me." He said nothing. And in that silence, I realized something I had been afraid to admit. My regret about becoming a parent early had been twisted into something that could be weaponized, against me, against Ethan, even against the truth. That night, I sat awake, listening to Ethan breathe, wondering if trust could ever be rebuilt. I loved him, my son, more than anything. But loving someone sometimes means learning to protect them from people you once thought you could rely on. And in that moment, I understood, motherhood isn't just about love. It's about vigilance. About knowing when to hold close and when to step back. About surviving heartbreak even while cradling joy. I didn't know yet how far I would have to go to protect Ethan. I only knew one thing: I couldn't let fear and regret control our lives any longer. It was one of those nights where the air feels heavy, like the walls are pressing in. Ethan had finally fallen asleep, and I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the muted glow of the lamp. My hands shook slightly, the exhaustion, the worry, the relentless weight of responsibility, it all hit me at once. Ryan was in the kitchen, supposedly making tea, but I could feel him there even when he wasn't saying a word. The sound of the kettle felt like an intrusion. I tried to tell myself it was normal, that he was here now, trying to help, but a part of me wanted to scream. "I think he's ready for solid food more regularly," Ryan said casually, leaning against the counter. I froze, the spoon I had been holding suspended in the air. "We've been working on it," I said quietly. "He's fine." "You seem stressed," he said, almost softly. But the weight behind his words made my chest tighten. It wasn't concern. It was observation. Judgment. I wanted to push back, to tell him he had no right. But part of me hesitated. I knew he could be persuasive, charming in a way that made you doubt your own instincts. "I'm tired," I admitted, finally. "I've been up all night again." "You weren't here. You left me to figure this out alone." Ryan's face softened for a moment, but then the edges sharpened again. "I know I left," he said quietly. "And I've regretted it every day. I want to be here now. I don't want to lose him." His words, so calm, so measured, sent a ripple of fear through me. Not for Ethan, for me. For the way he could tilt everything with a single sentence. I wanted to believe him, but I also remembered the secrets, the private messages, the moments he had used against me before. The memory made my stomach twist. That night, I found myself watching him while he sat on the floor playing with Ethan. The laughter between them was easy, natural, but my heart felt tight. I realized then, I was terrified. Terrified that he could manipulate the situation again. Terrified that I might lose Ethan's trust, his love, if Ryan decided to rewrite the rules of our lives. I tried to breathe. Tried to remind myself of all I had done for him, all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, all the love. But the fear was louder. A few days later, Ryan sent a message: "I want to talk about custody. I don't want anyone to be hurt." My heart froze. Hurt? Ethan? Me? Who did he mean? I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. Because every instinct screamed that whatever conversation was coming, it would be a minefield. When we finally sat down to talk, it wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices. Just calm words, precise, almost surgical. "I think we need a plan," he said. "Something stable. Something official." I nodded slowly. "I agree," I said. "But stability isn't about control. It's about what's best for him. Not what you think will make your life easier." Ryan's face hardened. "I want what's best for him," he said, tone clipped. "You're the one who doubts me." And in that moment, I realized, the fear wasn't just about losing him. It was about losing control over the narrative, losing the truth of our lives to someone who could rewrite it at any moment. I had spent months questioning myself, my decisions, my abilities as a mother. And now, I realized, that doubt was exactly what Ryan had counted on. I stayed silent for a long moment, letting him speak, letting him reveal his reasoning, his calculated calm. Then I said the thing I had been rehearsing in my head for weeks. "You don't get to decide alone. Not anymore." His jaw tightened. "I've always been part of this," he said. "You left," I whispered. "You chose when it was convenient, not when it mattered." The room went quiet. Ethan's soft snores floated from the bedroom. I felt exhaustion and clarity at the same time. Exhaustion from the constant battle, and clarity that my role as a mother didn't depend on anyone else's approval, not his, not the court, not even my own fleeting doubts. That night, I sat in the dark living room after Ryan left, and I finally admitted the full truth to myself. I had regretted the timing. I had regretted the overwhelming weight that parenthood brought too soon. I had doubted my own strength. But I had never regretted Ethan. And that distinction, subtle, fragile, essential, became my anchor. Because no matter how persuasive, how calm, how right Ryan seemed, my love for Ethan was something that couldn't be measured, manipulated, or stolen. That night, I made a silent promise. I would protect him. I would fight. Not out of anger. Not out of resentment. But out of love. And for the first time in a long time, fear felt like a tool, not a chain. The day of the final meeting came quietly. No dramatic entrances, no shouting. Just a small office, sunlight slipping through the blinds, and the soft hum of the heater. Ryan arrived on time, holding a small bag of toys. Ethan ran to him, smiling without hesitation, and I felt a twist in my chest. Love and fear tangled together, as they always had. We sat down across from each other, and for the first time in months, I noticed the vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't performing. He was, just him, a man who had made mistakes and now had to face them. I want to be honest, Ryan said quietly. I know I hurt you. I know I hurt him. I'm not proud of it. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Acknowledging that is the first step, I said. The social worker asked questions. About routines, about support systems, about what we had learned from the past. I answered carefully, but I also let myself be honest, the kind of honesty that burns and frees at the same time. Ryan did the same. And while he struggled, stumbled over words, and admitted failures I had been carrying alone for years, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Forgiveness is possible, even if trust isn't instant. By the end of the meeting, the plan was clear. Primary custody would remain with me. Ryan would have structured visitation, supervised at first, then gradually increasing. But more importantly, there was accountability now. Legal structures, agreements, and boundaries. Not perfect, but safe. Walking out of that office, I felt exhaustion and relief at the same time. I held Ethan's hand tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of his hair, feeling the solid reality of him next to me. I thought back to the nights I had cried quietly in the dark, the moments I had questioned my strength, my choices, my sanity. I had survived all of it. And I had learned something profound. Regret does not erase love. Mistakes do not define worth. And even when life begins too soon, and fear feels endless, it is possible to build something steady, to protect, to nurture, to choose again. Months passed. Life settled into a rhythm. Ethan started school. His laughter filled the apartment. Ryan kept his word, showing up consistently, quietly, without grand gestures or demands. He became a steady presence rather than a disruptive force. And I noticed a subtle change in myself. I didn't feel trapped anymore. I didn't feel defined by the mistakes of the past. I felt capable. Resilient. Alive in a way I hadn't known in those early months. One evening, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "were you scared when I was little?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes," I admitted. "I was scared. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." He grinned and yawned. "I know." And in that moment, I understood fully, motherhood is not perfection. It is endurance. It is courage. It is love, even when fear and regret live side by side. I sat in the dark after he fell asleep, listening to his breathing, and felt a quiet, steady peace. I had faced the worst parts of my story, the doubt, the fear, the toxic presence of someone I had once trusted, and survived. I knew now that regret was not the enemy. It was the teacher. It had shown me my limits, my strength, my capacity for fierce love. Ethan stirred in his sleep, small hands curling into tiny fists. I watched him, feeling the weight of the years, the nights of fear and loneliness, the battles I had fought silently. And I smiled. Because the story wasn't about the mistakes. It was about the love that endured. And that love, messy, complicated, imperfect, was enough.